turn off their cell phones.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emily, and also thank you very much, Peter, for bringing me here also this year, not just a year ago. I would like to to share with you, not to present the book, but share with you few of my conclusions and methods. Please come in. Come in, please. Yeah, that's okay. Some of my methods and conclusions that I use in writing this book, Lives in Common, which is very different from my previous publications. It's not about negotiations. It's not about political history. It is about everyday life of human beings, of average citizens. And it was very well received up to now. Perhaps later on I will get negative reviews, but up to now I'm very happy with the reviews that were published internationally. The book is only in English for the time being. Hopefully later this year, towards the end of the year, it will be also published in Hebrew. I hope that one day it will be translated also to Arabic and other languages, but at the moment it is only in English. The American edition is published by Oxford, and the London edition, the UK edition, is published by Hearst in London. In the book, I cover 150 years, which is very uncommon in writings about Israel-Palestine. Usually, or let's say in my book, The Shift, I deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict from 2000 up to 2014 or 15. I also compare the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of the 2000 on to Oslo period from 94. So I hardly cover, let's say, 20 years or so, 25 years. Here I decided to cover what the Annal school calls longue durée, 150 years, in order to give a very panoramic perspective of everyday life in 3 cities. The subject of everyday life is also something that is very new, not in history research. Please come in. We have, okay, you can take also I have here a spare chair. So it is very common in writing on European history. It is also common recently, we have in Hebrew few studies on everyday life in mandatory Palestine, State of Israel, 50s, 60s, and so on. But I felt that we lack the everyday life history of Arab-Jewish encounter. Because what we have up to date is the encounter in conflict times and conflict zones and wars. Some works are also mine on negotiations, but even if we publish on negotiations, it is with the context of the conflict, how to heal the conflict. I decided to focus on everyday life, what we call history from below. Starting from the streets, what was going on there in mixed cities between Jews and Arabs? What were the encounters between Jews and Arabs in 3 different cities in center Palestine, along 150 years? So what was going on there in the neighborhood, in the school, in the coffee shop, mixed marriage, whatever, religious festivals, holy sites, but only the encounter. Remember, not the history of holy site, Not the history of the conflict over holy site, but the encounter between Jews and Arabs in this place. The encounter in the school, or in the coffee shop, or in the neighborhood. So I use many private papers, archives, memoirs, few interviews on the period of post-67 with the people. I cannot, unfortunately, interview those who lived during the mandatory Palestine, of course. But what remains are their writings, and I use extensively, I use photographs. This is also a method that I feel is missing in the research, in our research on Israeli-Palestinian encounter. We don't use so much photographs, but photographs tells us much about everyday life, how the streets look like. And then I use also photographs. Of course, there are some short videos in YouTube, please, in YouTube and so on. So every source that I could find, I included that, because I think every small detail, every photograph gives us a piece of information, and I combined all few details, very small details, in each book or on each photograph or each memoir. I build them up, I construct them into a narrative. So the book, I put my target audience or target reader as the average reader, not just the academic scholars and my colleagues and professors in Middle Eastern studies. I wish to include also the general reader, those who are interested in the subject, and I'm very happy that up to now the reviews are good. They were published by, let's say, The Guardian, Haaretz in English, The New Republic, as you see here. My publisher is very proud. The New Republic selected it as the best nonfiction of the year. One of the 10 bests of November by the Christian Science Monitor, and so on. And also the endorsement of Salim Tamari, my colleague from Bir Zeit, made me happy. And recently also the magazine, electronic magazine, the Electronic Intifada, published a very good review of the book. So I was very happy to see it published by the Electronic Intifada. So the target reader get the message, and I'm very happy. I must say, as an author, this makes me happy much more than the good reviews by a few of my academic colleagues in a journal that nobody reads, but maybe promotion committee members if they need to, but only they read it. My perspective is, and here once again I made a decision that is quite different from many other decisions I took when I wrote my previous books. I decided to write from the place, from the country perspective, from the ground perspective, from the terrain perspective, not from the perspective of the group, of the nation that resides on this terrain. So because if I would have go for the nation that resides on the terrain, is us against them, always in the conflict, us against them. But from the terrain perspective, each side, each resident is equal. All of them belong to the place. The place is the shared platform for everybody. So once I take the perspective of the place, of the common ground, it means that everybody shares, regardless what one side says excludes the other, and vice versa. So I always ask, okay, how it looks like in the place, how the street looks like, how the neighborhood, the compound where they lived, and so on. The construction was, I can share with you more stories about the time consuming of constructing such a book. I don't have notes in purpose. I did not include notes, but only references, bibliographical references. I have more than 600 references because the book is made from very small pieces of information, but I constructed into a story. I decided in purpose to start the book prior to nationalism, prior to Zionism and prior to Arab nationalism. At the late 19th century, at the 1870s, when the capitulation took place in Palestine, Westernization, the West entered into Palestine, and I decided to take 3 cities that are interconnected and different. 2 cities, Jerusalem and Hebron, are the religious holy cities, the holiest cities of the country to Islam and Judaism, okay, not to Christianity, but to Islam and Judaism. And 1 city is a coast city which served up to the 30s when the Brits inaugurated Haifa port. Jaffa was the entrance gate to Palestine. Entrance gate for pilgrimage, for newcomers, for everyone who came from the west, came through Jaffa, the big tour, the grand tour to the Orient by Westerners, Mark Twain, for instance, the very famous, and others. They came mostly through Jaffa. So Jaffa and Jerusalem were connected, and Jerusalem and Hebron were connected. The Muslims that went to the small Hajj, the pilgrimage to Al-Aqsa, continued to go to the Cave of Patriarchs, Al-Masjid al-Ibrahimi in Hebron. Jews traveled between the 3 cities. Westernization entered to the 3 of them, definitely with different degrees and levels of Westernization. So I decided, and I start my narrative prior to nationalism because I was interested, or I'm interested to introduce the following subject. When nationalism entered, because when Zionism entered, when Arab nationalism entered, I say entered because each of them was founded abroad, was not founded in Palestine. What did they find on the ground? What was there? And what I show is that here perhaps it surprises few people. I show very clearly that, I think it's clearly, that a local identity was well established in Palestine, a kind of local patriotism in the late 19th century. And when Arab nationalism came, it was already there. And both Jews and Arabs were Palestinian locals. Both Jews and Arabs were natives that shared the the attachment to the place and to the people residing on the place. Prior to World War I. So when Zionism entered, or Arab nationalism entered, they found local identity, kind of local patriotism. Although at that time the Zionist center was located outside Palestine, and there was no Palestinian national movement per se. The Palestinian national movement, as establishment, was established after World War I. But the identity, the local patriotism, came prior to the establishment, the formal establishment of the movement. Unfortunately, the conflict between the two national movements created division inside this local identity between Jews and Arabs. So, but the division was made very gradually. So I beg to differ, and I hope that I show it clearly in the book, in the first half of the book. I beg to differ with those who argue that the division between, that all Jews were Zionist or all Palestinians were Palestinian nationalists sticking to the national ideology and identity. And from the first conflict on, there was a full division between the two sides. This is kind of an argument that each national movement proceeds and wants to mobilize support and so on. So there is a debate between historians exactly when the division started. Was it in the 1919-1920 riots, Jerusalem, Jaffa? Was it in 29 Jerusalem, Hebron riots? Was it the revolt of 36? But if we follow the issue of what happened on the ground, how people interacted, did they split all of a sudden totally between Jews and Arabs after let's say 36 revolt, the violence, half a year, six months of terrorist attacks and civil war and emergency laws the Brits put on Palestine? Did they totally split? No. Afterwards, for instance, about 10,000 Jews were forced to leave Jaffa in 36, and they were evacuated and put in tents in Tel Aviv. But afterwards, they went back to their homes in Jaffa, and everything was very normal. Later on, archives, Tel Aviv municipality archives, is full of documents telling the story. So the watershed that I find and identify as the big watershed that split between the two sides is the 48 war, or more precisely, the period between 45, the end of World War II, and 48 war. This was the period where the two divide, and the division was completed during the war. In the cases of Jerusalem and Jaffa, April 48. April 48. This was the time when the Palestinians abandoned Jaffa, and the Palestinians who lived in West Jerusalem, Southwest Jerusalem, also very few in far West Jerusalem, they left to the what later came on as West Bank. And then the identity was either you are Israeli Jew or a Palestinian. So the identity that I write about of Arab Jew in Palestine, what the type that I describe in the first chapter of Arab Jew, stopped to exist in 48 war. So all the talks today on reconstructing this identity of Arab Jew, there are talks in Israel, there are few groups that advocates let's go and build the identity or reconstruct the identity of Arab Jew. They want to build something new, but they cannot go back and reconstruct what existed then. So there is no way to go back to what happened then, because there is no common ground between Jews and Arabs. There is a very strong Israeli state, a Jewish identity that overrides the Arabs that it rules. So the type of relations is hierarchical and not horizontal. So therefore, it is almost impossible to go back to what happened then. The local identity, the Arab Jew identity is expressed, I must say, is expressed in many pages in memoirs of Jews who lived then. And this kind of historical source is neglected either by both sides. So the historians of the Zionist conflict neglect these memoirs because their focus is on conflict, their focus is on wars, their focus is on the Zionist movement, not what was going there on the ground, but the ideology or the policy and so on. Although many of the people in Palestine were not, great advocates of Zionism. They were Arab Jews. And the later conflict, let's say, rides over the minds of the historians. So they neglected this very rich library of memoirs. Or the Palestinian, the mirror image of the Palestinian collective mind. We cannot include Jews in our Palestinian identity. It's impossible. And they don't read, most of the Palestinian or Arab historians, they don't read the Hebrew. So they don't use Hebrew sources. Here and there are Palestinian private papers that writes about the same identity that was there, and Salim Tamari is a very good historian that publishes this kind of materials that he finds in private papers and changes what we know about Palestine at that time. You can ask questions free. Don't wait to the Q&A. Feel free to interrupt, and it's part of, because sometimes I forget what is in your mind, what a question you may have in mind, because for me it's yes.
Thank you. I was wondering, because when you were speaking about the conflict or the division starting in 48, I interviewed another professor a couple of years ago, and he was referring to what was happening all during the 20s and the 30s of enormous amount of immigration of Zionist Jews throwing Palestinians off the lands or whatever. So there was a lot of bitterness starting to build then. And I wondered, the other thing he said, that there was a difference between the Jews who were living with them as brothers, and when the Zionists came, there was, you could only, if land was bought for Zionists, Arabs couldn't work it or live on it. So I think I'm having trouble with the division starting in 48.
Okay. Thank you for asking this question, because I struggle against the conventional wisdom, and you bring up something that it is there in the conventional wisdom. Um, the Zionist, okay, I would like to say the following. Not every individual that immigrated to Palestine on a Zionist certificate was really a Zionist, okay? So let's take those who immigrated in the 20s and mostly the early 30s to Tel Aviv. And they did not went to establish a kibbutz or a corporative, a moshav in the valley, Israel Valley or elsewhere, okay? They were middle class, typical merchants, middle class, that encountered with the Palestinians. They became Arab Jew like others. Okay, so this is one. Second, if you check the data about land purchase in the Israel Valley, okay, where the Nahalal and Harod, between, let's say, Haifa and Tiberias, okay, the Lake of Galilee. The same, during the 30s, the same amount of land that the Zionist movement bought from Effendis residing outside Palestine at that period, the same size of land was purchased by private people or Zionist movement around Tel Aviv and Jaffa, and brought many immigrants to the city. So the labor movement wrote the history of the conflict as the history between the kibbutzim and the Palestinian peasants, because they were labor movement people that dislike, to say the least, the middle classes of the urban middle classes of Tel Aviv, the petit bourgeois, those that, like Europeans, those cities that we left in order to create a new Jew that cultivate the land, etc., etc. So they turn their eyes from the history of the petit bourgeois in Tel Aviv or the old Arab Jews, let's say Oriental, what we call Oriental Jews in Jerusalem, or the Orthodox, or the Yiddish speakers in Jerusalem. I bring them back into history. And remember that in Jerusalem, since the 1870s, there is a Jewish majority in the city. The land, the properties, the houses and land is owned by Muslims, Christians, by Arabs. But the demography is in favor of the Jews since the late 19th century. This is something very unique. So it creates kind of an encounter there. And at the eve of 48, 22,000 Palestinians lived in southwest Jerusalem, in Katamon, Talbieh, Baqa. 22,000 against this area, in these three neighborhoods, 500 Jews only integrated. But there were other neighborhoods that were exclusively or mainly Jewish, Rehavia or Talpiot and so on. So the West Jerusalem was mixed. The ownership of many houses in West Jerusalem along Jaffa Road, from Jaffa Gate to the far end at the west, towards the road towards, today it's to Tel Aviv, many houses were owned by Palestinians that rented them to Jews. So the city was highly, highly mixed, and the Jerusalem was developed by both Jews and Arabs. Okay? So, the encounter in Tel Aviv, Jaffa, on everyday life was something that I think we don't know enough, but I try to change the perspective in my book. So a cinema in Jaffa showed a Jewish film of Esther HaMalka, Queen Esther. And the Eden cinema in Tel Aviv showed Egyptian Arab-speaking films. And there was a high encounter between the communities. And this is not the type of encounter that this labor movement, the official Zionist history okay, creates. So on the one hand, there were conflict between the peasants and the labor movement settlers, of course. But this is part of the story. This is the story of the small villages in the periphery. In the main cities, there was a different reality. Very different reality existed in the main cities, which is not much written about, actually. And this is important to acknowledge. For a moment, I would like to go back to the issue of Jerusalem. In the Zionist perspective, West Jerusalem was developed exclusively by Jews. This is the official, even if you take the writings of Professor Yoshua Ben Aryeh from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He published many volumes, the history of Jewish Jerusalem, etc. He is a very Zionist historian, and he sticks to this conclusion. Jerusalem was developed exclusively, New Jerusalem was developed exclusively by Jews, by the Zionists or the Jews and so on. No, incorrect, to say the least. Incorrect. But Jews were settled not only in West Jerusalem, but also to the north of Nablus Gate, where today is Sheikh Jarrah. Few Jews lived there, and many Palestinians lived in southwest Jerusalem. Palestinians owned many buildings, what is today, let's say, center Jerusalem, the old city center, downtown Jerusalem, in the Jaffa Road, King George, Ben Yehuda Street. Most of the houses there were owned by Palestinians. And the coffee shops were there, this area of the triangle, city center, the triangle, we call it in Jerusalem the triangle. The city center was mixed. There were, the people met in the coffee shop in the city center, or in the cinema, Zion Cinema, where is Zion Square today, or in downtown Tel Aviv and downtown Jaffa, and also in the border between them, where let's say what they call, the memoirs call, or we call Arab cafes owned by Jews. And then there was a tension, the 36 riots take place, the Jews move from the border zone of the conflict area, they moved north to Tel Aviv, to the city of Tel Aviv, open Arab coffee shop in the city of the Ashkenazi, European Tel Aviv, and then many letters come to the municipality, close it down because there are whores and then collaborators and crime, etc., etc. All the wrong perception of the Orient is there in the letters. It shows the perception and show the population movement and so on. So I try to describe the differences between what we know and what was there on the ground. First, Jews and Arabs developed both Jerusalem and Jaffa. Of course, Tel Aviv was established as an exclusive Jewish city. It was an exclusive Jewish city, but since it was small, it has to lean heavily on Jaffa, which was the main Palestinian city in Palestine, up to 48 war. At the eve of 48 war, in Jaffa, there were 70,000 residents. 70,000 residents in Jaffa. It was the main Palestinian city. 10,000 of them were Jews. 5,000 lived in the city center and 5,000 in the suburbs around the Palestinian city center. So Jaffa was mixed. It was the main the main Palestinian Arab city. And also Jaffa was developed, the Palestinians, the wealthy and the middle classes left the Kasbah, the city center, and built villas in Ajami, Jabalia, what is today Jerusalem Boulevard, and so on. So Jaffa also expanded due to westernization, modernization, Jewish immigration, money coming on, people sell land to the Zionists. So there was a kind of encounter that created the development of Jaffa. Unfortunately, the history of Jaffa is lost because the Palestinians fled and left everything behind. I hope that one day the history of the city will be published not as the city in the war, but the city prior to the war, from the late 19th century up to 48, in order to show to have a reliable history of the main Palestinian city. Now, what happened in 67 on? Because this is the second part of my book. Here also I cannot go into too many details. I hope that you will read the book. Let me start with a conclusion regarding the post-67/48 period. What we have today did not exist at the first years of the Israeli rule over Palestinians after 67, or the Israeli administration over the Israeli occupation of Jaffa after 48 war. What we have today was not there at first years. Yes.
Before you transition, may I ask you, what was the Jewish population of historic Palestine in 1900?
In 1900. I'm sorry. About 9% or so. Okay, maximum. But then it's important to see that in Jerusalem they were majority, and in Jaffa there was a very big Jewish community. So in the cities it was very different than in the periphery. This is my argument. So we have to study the cities not in the context of the periphery, okay, but as an entities of themselves, okay. And
black population in the U.S.
Yes, and I must say that also one thing, that the dhimmi status, the inferiority of the Jews, the Omar Ahed Omar, the Omar laws, the lower status in the Sharia was not enforced at that time, was irrelevant. So, for instance, I found in memoirs the following. Usually, the contract, a Jew renting an apartment or room or house from a Palestinian owner was made, in many cases, in the Sharia court in Arabic. Everybody spoke Arabic. Even Ashkenazi Jews spoke Arabic. Okay, Arab Jews, I mean also Ashkenazi. Don't mix it with what we have today in the Shas party and all this, that Ashkenazis are excluded. Ashkenazi Jews were Arab Jews in their own way, but they were part of this local identity. But in many cases, the lease, the rent, was agreed in the rabbinical court in Hebrew, because the Arabs knew also Hebrew. They did not use it in their life or market and so on at home, but it was done. So this kind of or mixed marriage, it was not something that it was not legal. It was not something that the communities encouraged, but it was well known and people accepted it as a matter of fact. Okay, so the segregation along religious identity or communities was not so hard and as it was in the medievals. Or I'll give you another example, which is I find it fascinating. In Jerusalem, in the souk, in the bazaar, there was a public bath. Because at homes, very few people had bathroom in homes. So the hours were divided: in the morning, the men, and the afternoon, evening, women. Okay, so I bring a very lively description of the men hanging on together, Jews and Arabs, in the joint bath, and conclude commercial deals and speak about politics and gossip. Okay, but in the afternoon there was one room that was in the Muslim-owned public bath. There was one room that was used as the Jewish Orthodox ritual bath of women when they end their period. And it was the supervisor of the woman supervisor was a Muslim woman. Now imagine, can it happen today? No way, even not here in Berkeley. And even not, I think, in the most liberal synagogue, not Chabad. Okay, I don't speak about Chabad. But it was a matter of fact. Now, could it happen? Was this the case? Was this the case in the medievals? Of course not. But this is an example that shows how the people were integrated. The two groups were integrated. Even if I go into the wartime, and here I would like to bring up another example which is also very, very touching. In southwest Jerusalem, as I said, 22,000 Palestinians lived up to April 48, when Israeli militia occupied this area, the Haganah militia. And the Palestinians left. Some of them left earlier, between December 47 and April 48, but they left. The Brits, years earlier, put two Mukhtars, head of community in southwest Jerusalem, one Palestinian and one Arab, one Jew. The Jew Mukhtar was a person called Reuven Mas. Mr. Mas was at each of them, okay, each of the two Mukhtars, was in charge of providing certificate of residency. So the Brits can know that this person lived in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, and people moved in or moved out, a boy or girl was born, certificate. The war comes in 48, and the Palestinians leave the area. Reuven Mas manages a registry of who left which room / apartment / house, and who entered. As a Mukhtar, at that time, there was no state of Israel. As a Mukhtar, he was in charge of providing certificate of residency to the new entrants. To any Jew who entered to an apartment that the Palestinian left, he was in charge to provide a certificate. So he makes a registry of who entered where, okay? And then he on his own initiative, he issues a document in which the Jew who entered says, I am committed to evacuate, to give back this apartment or room to the owner when he comes back, immediately. And I will take all the belongings of the person who was living here, close them in one room and not use it and not let anyone to take it. Okay? Now, well, here is the issue. It is in April 48. The Reuven Mas' son was killed in January 48. He was a young Haganah officer on the way to help the Etzion bloc people in the siege. He was a student in Jerusalem. Dani Mas became a very well-known 48 war hero in Israeli mythology. He was a commander of a platoon of students that left for Jerusalem, went by foot to Etzion bloc south to Bethlehem, and then on their way they found an Arab shepherd, old person. They decided not to kill him. The shepherd went back to the village and brought all his family and Hamula and other villagers, and they killed the 35 platoon militia member. Now, this tragedy was formed up immediately as a war myth, and Dani Mas became a war hero immediately. Poets were written and so on. Now, in April, just 3 months after the killing of his son, he issues this document. In his mind, they will come back very soon. And if they come back, it is their home. And it tells much about the mindset of the people who lived together and what the war created. Now I will move to the post 48 and 67 wars. As I said, the situation that we have today in Jaffa or Jerusalem and Hebron was not there at the first years. Let's start with Jaffa. Very few Palestinians remained in Jaffa after April 48. Israel imposed a military law immediately, but a few months later, Jaffa was annexed officially to Tel Aviv, and then the military rule was replaced by formal annexation and Israeli civil law, everything. Israel brought many immigrants to take the houses of the Palestinian refugees. The immigrants came, many of them came from the Balkans, few from North Africa. I don't think that so many came from Iraq, but North Africa and the Balkans, Romania, Bulgaria, and the like. The relationship between the Palestinians and the newcomers were excellent because both of them were neglected and poor. So it was a brotherhood between the neglected and the poor people that Israel abandoned in a place that was totally abandoned. In the 50s, Jaffa was a place, let's say, the backyard of Tel Aviv with drugs and crime and so on, not the Jaffa that you find today. Only in the 70s, Israel decided, the Tel Aviv municipality decided to reconstruct Jaffa, and then what you see today, the gentrification, is something very, very new. And the old Jaffa, what Israel calls old Jaffa, is a very new Jaffa, because Israel destroyed almost all Arab Jaffa systematically. It was stopped by one person who went to Ben Gurion, an archaeologist, that said, stop it. So, but then it was the government decided to bring artists to live in the Kasbah, the former city center, the Arab city center. Artists, especially artists that were friends of the Israeli political elite, and they reconstruct something that has nothing to do with Ottoman Jaffa or Palestinian Jaffa. Nothing. It is a reconstruction that the perception of the Orient City, let's say, a modern perception of the Orient City, in my view, far away even from Old City Jerusalem or any other old city in Israel. Later, okay, in Jerusalem and Hebron, the relations up to the First Intifada were very, very different than what we have today. Both in Hebron, downtown Hebron, and in East Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, the relations at the first 20 years were constructed, shaped mainly by Teddy Kollek, against other views in the administration which I describe, Jerusalemites in the administration that wanted to impose on the Palestinians of East Jerusalem the same attitude as Israel imposed on the 48 Palestinians, the Palestinians that remained in Israel per se after 48 war. And Dayan, Kollek, and their followers decided not to let them do it. And I bring in the debate of the two approaches in the book. But this changed dramatically with the First Intifada and with what we have today, with settlers entering into Palestinian neighborhoods in order to Judaize the Palestinian neighborhoods in East Jerusalem. Here, the background or the history of late Ottoman period is very important to show how different is the present from the past. For instance, settlers enter to Silwan, settle in a house that is called Meyuchas house, but the person Meyuchas describes the relations that he had with his Arab neighbors at that time of the early 20th century. And this is very different. They act on behalf of person Meyuchas or family Meyuchas in order to Judaize the place, which is, and what they do is very, very different from the reality that was there prior to 48. And therefore here I contrast past and present in the book. So I move between past and present very often in order to show the differences or the relevancy and the dialogue between past and present, the encounter between past and present. So sometimes in the first half of the book, I use fast forward to the present or flashbacks. When I write about the present, I have flashbacks about what was then. So the book is not chronological, so therefore it is not so boring. But it is a decision that I took in purpose. To do it, I know that I will get tough criticism from academics on this. But anyhow, in Jerusalem, also what we have today is what we experts call Hebronization of Jerusalem. But it was not there at the first years. It was very, very different in the first 20 years. In Hebron also, the relations between Kiryat Arba settlers and downtown Hebron Palestinians up to 77, the first decade, were very different from what we have today. and the relations were it's not normal. There is an occupation and they are settlers, but on everyday life, the settlers shopped downtown Hebron, Hebronized, went to Kiryat Arba to the post office or to buy wine, for instance. Or a lawyer, extreme settler, he is a very extreme secular settler. He is a lawyer in Kiryat Arba. He was lawyer of Palestinians from downtown Hebron, presenting them in a case that there is a legal debate between a Jew and a Palestinian. All these kind of encounters, settlers wrote checks in Hebrew with the Hebrew calendar and gave it to the shoppers in Hebron, which it looks like a legend, something that never exists, but it exists. So it was not normal, but still very different than what happens today or since the entrance of settlers into downtown Hebron to the Casbah. It's a very different. And the violent, the ugly racism that we have downtown Hebron today did not exist there at the first decade. Yes.
Well, hindsight is always 20/20, and we have so much history now out of the archives and so on about how Zionism was actually quite sophisticated in its strategy from the beginning, at least by the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. It seems that most of the people there in Palestine, whether Jewish or Arabic, non-Jewish, or I should say Muslim or Christian, didn't really suspect that the Zionist project was an explicitly colonial project. And that's why they pretty much were not as aggressive maybe as some of their leaders were in saying stop the immigration. I don't know.
Okay, I see. My reading is slightly different. Okay, I relate to this subject in the context. Okay, the context is not. You put it as the classical historical
sort of nationalist,
of national and the grand design and something like that. My question was on the following. I bring many cases where local Palestinian natives helped Jews to buy land or cooperated with them on providing certificates to new immigrants. So what was running in their mind? Okay. Now in their mind, the Jews that they cooperated with were their Palestinian identity brothers and sisters. Yeah. And those who come from outside were colonialists, were foreigners, not even colonials. The concept was they are foreigners. They are foreigners that come here under the protection of the capitulation, or any kind of foreigner coming. Now I cooperate with my brother. Yeah. We have the same identity, I cooperate with him. And so I help him because foreigner, I get some benefits and something. It was not seen as a national issue. It was seen as, okay, there are so many, let's say, Italians and Austro-Hungarians and Russians, etc., etc. So they are up to very late. And then also was the interest, the economic interest. The Zionists paid much money for the land. And there was also the weakness of the Palestinian national movement as a movement, as an organization. But at the late 19th centuries, it was not nationalism, it was not Zionism as a movement. So if we read, and we have to be very careful, this is also one of the themes that I try to put into the narrative. we have to be very careful when we write history, not to impose the late on the previous. So what was there very late was not there in place in the first years. So we don't have to read it according to what happened then, later. We must read it as it was there in the 1870s or 80s or even the first and second decade of the 20th century up to, okay? So we have to be very careful and see through the eyes of the local people at that certain time. Okay? So therefore, I just a little bit changed this concept. So of course, if we write on a movement and so on, we tend immediately to give ideology, planning, high priority. On the ground, it was very different. When we look at
that's what I mean, is most of the people on the ground, they don't know that behind the scenes there are people like Ben Gurion and Chaim Weizmann and Jabotinsky and so on. You know, they're strategizing and are have access to power beyond foreign even.
No, the elite in Jerusalem, the Ottoman, the pro-Ottoman, those who were integrated into the local administration or the Constantinople Kushta administration, they knew, they sent petitions, etc. They read what the Zionist publications in Odessa, which was the main harbor for immigrants coming from Russia, Ukraine, to Palestine. But this was a very tiny elite integrated in the Ottoman administration, but not in the streets where it happened. This is different. So therefore, the history of from below, the average citizen, therefore it is very, very important. Which language they spoke, how they were dressed, what were the customs in eating, joint religious festivals, and so on. So Jews, for instance, participated in Nebi Musa, festival, and so on. So it was there, and they participated. I mean, they identified with the celebration. Okay, so it's not just they watch it like as an anthropologist. Okay, it's very nice. No, they took part as it is there, and they have some attachment as Jews to this Prophet Moses celebration, okay? And they write about it in memoirs. So this is very, very different from the perspective of that we have on. But also later, just a minute, okay? But later on, after '67, it's important to see that what we have today was not there from the beginning, on the streets even. If I take memoirs of Meron Ben-Benisti living in Abu Tor, which is on the seam line, Abu Tor is a Jerusalem neighborhood which the upper Abu Tor is Jewish and the lower one is Palestinian. And it was divided up to '67 between Israel and Jordan, and all of a sudden united. And he describes his relations as he then lived in Abu Tor with his neighbors, even during the first years of the Intifada, and when the son of the neighbor was arrested because he was part of a terrorist cell and planned to put a bomb in the neighborhood where his Meron Ben-Benisti's sons were playing with. All this kind, and what happens in Sukkot festival, and what happens if the Palestinian neighbor comes back from the Hajj, all this kind. So when they just send a cake to the other side celebration, when they invite the neighbor, you see that this kind of questions that he brings up tells much about the attitude, but then the division happens, though these days there is a very tough division between the two, the upper and the lower. Violence is very common between Palestinians and Israelis in Abu Tor, for instance. just a moment. No?
No rush.
Okay, so one more thing I would like to mention. I have a very long chapter on refugees visiting their previous homes. What happens when, what the refugees, not what happens, what the refugees write on their journey to the home, what is going in their mind, how they describe, and what is the encounter between the person who lives there and the refugee who once he or his father or grandfather lived there, and he just want to visit. That's it. Just to visit, not to repatriate, not to take it, nothing, just to visit. What happens? And I have many documents that they describe, the visitors describe. And it's a very hard to read, and it's very touching, very, very moving, but it's hard to read. But one thing is very clear. There is no one, let's say, iron law that dictates the encounter. Each case is different. So the grand ideology not dictate each encounter. There is difference between what happens there on the doorstep or the window of the house and reality. Okay, so you go.
No rush at all.
No, okay.
I just wanted to ask you sort of a tangent to what you were going backward dialoguing about. I read a contemporary statement, I can't even say what that date it was in, but yeah, I would say the past 10 plus or minus years, where I guess, not called Sephardi or Mizrahi, I don't know if you use the word Mizrahi, Jew was saying that he actually, although the conflict is creating tensions, he said, otherwise, I actually get along better with the Palestinians socially than I do with the Ashkenazi borders. And I'm just wondering, you're probably Ashkenazi, but I'm just wondering what you say about that as a generalization. I did read that though.
Yeah. Okay. So it's very common of what they call Oriental Jews, but I don't think that they are Oriental Jews. They are Arab Jews. They are ashamed to say I'm Arab. It's a problem to Jew to say I'm an Arab Jew. Think about it. What kind of a statement is this nowadays, Israel? So they say Oriental like they are Taiwanese Jews. Or Sfaradi like they are from Cordova. Just to escape the I'm an Arab Jew. But okay, but this is a statement that is used by several Oriental Jews in order to put forward the differences or discrimination that the Ashkenazi, the bad treatment that Ashkenazi Jews treated with them. But Ashkenazi Jews were also in a way Arab Jews, not as the Ladino speakers, okay? Even though the Ladino was not so dominant, I must say, I found very interestingly that the Ladino was much less dominant among Sephardi Oriental Jews as they argue. Arabic was much more in common and used and so on, much more than Ladino. Okay, so for instance, but it's in the context of the present. It's not a reliable description of the past. Okay, this argument that you put forward. Okay, it has something in it true. Okay, it is based, let's say, on reality. I would like to, okay, I will put it as a statement. I think that is one of the conclusions that comes out of my writing. The two national movements, Palestinian national movement and the Jewish national movement, not only constructed nationalism, built national identity, but they also destroyed something that was there before. Let's take with Zionism. Zionism destroyed the Arab-Jew identity. Okay, in this case, okay? So it comes out very clearly. So the statement that you put in your question is part of they destroyed. Zionism destroyed. I think this is right. Zionism as a project, not because it was Ashkenazi, because it argued of an exclusive attachment of the Jewish people to the land. That was something that the project is all about, and therefore it destroyed any previous identity that claims that both Jews and Arabs attached to this land. And its mirror image comes in the Palestinian side as well. So nationalism destroys. Okay.
So I just follow up a little bit on this idea of the Arab groups. I've worked a lot on this in the context of North Africa. So two quick things. One, and I don't think that this necessarily has to be the case for these people to be Arab Jews, but did the Jews call themselves Arab Jews? This is often the litmus test that's used in other places. Did they call themselves Arabs? So I'm wondering that, first of all. Second of all, I think what you say stands for Palestine. I think if you look at North Africa, it's not Zionism that destroys this French colonialism much, much before. Yeah. So I think we can't, and that rupture comes, lots of people try to say that rupture comes in 48, for instance, for Morocco, the largest community of Jews in the Arab world, and it doesn't. It comes in 56 with the independence.
Yeah. Well, first of all, not only the Jews call themselves Arab Jews, they describe in private papers that I bring the description. I'm Arab. Let's say a person from I think it's Shlush from Jaffa who moved to what is now Tel Aviv, South Tel Aviv, and so he described, or his son described his father. They said, oh, at home he had the galabiyah and we sat on the floor and ate with hands, etc. You see, totally Arab. And then when he went to business, he put the suit and the hat, the Western hat, and so you see that. And the father dictate who will marry with whom, and so.
And judging by the name, that's an Ashkenazi family.
Shlush, no.
Yeah.
It's Ashkenazi originally. Okay, but they were
totally
totally Arabs. And so on. So, for instance, photographs that I mentioned, I took photographs of boys, girls graduating schools in different years at the end of 19th century, early 20th century, and write about who dresses what among the Western dress or Arab Oriental dress, with tarbush, without tarbush, with jacket, with galabiyah, and you see how they change, how they move, and so on. So, of course, yes, but what is mostly interesting is that Palestinians call them Arab Jews, our Arab Jews. Even later, even when the conflict comes in, they call it, and then there are memoirs of Jews and Palestinians in mixed areas, let's say in the southwest Jerusalem at the end of 40 years, how difficult it is for them to separate, to live, and to separate. And it shows not only Reuven Mas, but also others, it shows how much they work together, live together, and so on. So this is very different than the Zionist perception. Those who came from outside, lived in the kibbutz, or became party apparatchik in the Zionist parties and so on. Their mindset was totally different, but they took over. That's exactly what I show in the book, how they took over, and the reality that was there totally destroyed. In the main cities, because what I write about the main cities of Palestine, central, the Palestine center, and not on the periphery.
About 5 more minutes.
Okay, yes.
Oh, yeah, you paint this really interesting portrait of, these two people, and when you look closely, you see there are lots of real contacts, almost the things you described, you almost say intimate cultural contact were taking place. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, I'm a biologist actually, and I've done some genetics of Jewish populations and so on, so I forced myself to get a little bit of acquaintance with the situation, I'll call it. But anyway, so this is my question, and you mentioned mixed marriages. In that context, I mean, we're all animals after all. You get in the same place, and they're the same species, and so on and so forth. So that naturally happens everywhere, all the time. And so I'm just curious about these mixed marriages. Can you say any more about them? Were they always like the Arab Jews, you use that phrase, or Palestinian? And was there like any sex, preference of one side or the other? Or how did it change over time? I presume it's near zero today, or maybe for a while, but that's just my assumption. But in these earlier decades,
Yeah. Okay, first I made a decision to include in the book only cases where I find names. Not just, general. There were many mixed marriage, and so I decided to ignore, put only names, and I bring names, many. Okay, I think relatively many. This is one. In most cases, the woman was a Jew, and the husband was Palestinian Arab. In many cases, the names are of elite members, Palestinian elite members. But I assume that there were also, let's say, lower classes mixed marriage of this kind.
each culture had some degree of tolerance if these were allowed to occur, the marriages.
And it happens in a period where the barriers, the religious and the social barriers, are shattered and demolished because of the westernization, because of the weakness of the religious identity, the emergence of new identities, new education norms, new housing norms. Everything in life changes. So therefore there is more openness and so on. There are many pages in Jawariya memoirs were published, part of it was published by Salim Tamari in English, about sex decadent parties that were lasting days. With the participation of Palestinian elite members, Jewish women, Jewish even males, men, kind of parties in Jerusalem in the late 19th century, early 20th century. In Jerusalem with music and hashish, consuming and so on. It's kind of, and many elite Palestinian elite members has Jewish mistress, and well known in names, I bring the names, and so on. So it was there. It was not illegitimate, but tolerated, accepted as a matter of fact. After 67, after 48 in Jaffa, I think very few. Today, perhaps more, but it's illegitimate today because of the national tension between Jews and Arabs. In East Jerusalem, I could not find names, post-67 names. I asked my Palestinian friends, they tell me that there are sometimes a mixed marriage between let's say very low classes, couples, mostly Jewish women and a Palestinian male, but the women convert to Islam and leave, but it's something that is even socially unacceptable, so there are no names. What I found, which is something very interesting, I don't have time, but invite you to read, is reports of the the head of the Jerusalem police, the commander of the Jerusalem police, on Jewish prostitutes working in East Jerusalem. And I also found in Israeli archives letters from Arab Jerusalem, men, women, sent to the prime minister about the sexual corruption that comes with the Israeli occupation, changing norms. What the Israeli occupation brought very different norms. So the report of the head of the Jerusalem police is he compares where prostitutes worked and alcohol was allowed under the Jordanian rule and what is today in Jerusalem. So under Israel, and it shows how on the streets, in the different level, how in the streets the relations and the norms, the social norms were changing in East Jerusalem, also with the entrance of the Western tourists in the 70s, the beatniks, the hippies, and so on. So remember, the flower boys, this generation came also with the Israeli occupation. So much is changing there then, and also I found very interesting documents that put differently what we know about the Israeli rule and what happened to the society there since 67. This is also something that is less known. We don't write. I also wrote so much about Jerusalem, always about organizations, conflict, debate, and so on, not what's going on in the street, the history of the average citizen. So I try to bring something new.
I read just within the past couple of years and saw an ostensibly very middle class marriage between an Israeli Jewish woman and a Palestinian man, very middle class, and they weren't able to negotiate, living as man and wife in Israel. So ironically, they moved to Germany so they could have a normal life.
Yeah, that's a very problem nowadays.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.